Her billionaire philanthropist, admired for his legacy and generosity, hides a void that not all the luxury in the world can fill: the mystery of his origins. When a forgotten letter reveals dark secrets about his biological family, he embarks on a risky journey to unravel conspiracies, betrayals, and a past that many want to keep buried. Amid threats, unexpected alliances, and devastating moral dilemmas, he discovers that the truth can be as transformative as it is dangerous. How far will he go to reconcile his past and present? A thrilling story of courage, sacrifice, and the search for what truly matters. Night fell over Chicago as Nathaniel Blackwood, the enigmatic 45-year-old billionaire, decided to take his usual evening stroll through the gardens of his Beverly Hills mansion. The ritual, always solitary, was one of the few moments when he allowed his thoughts to flow freely, away from the endless spreadsheets and reports that filled his screens during the day. The air was particularly cold that June night, and the city's typical fog created an almost cinematic scene around the property. Nathaniel adjusted the cashmere scarf around his neck as his footsteps echoed along the stone path leading to the edge of his estate. There, a meticulously trimmed hedge separated his private world from the adjacent public park. Loneliness had been his most constant companion since he took control of the business empire left by his father. Gradually, he had convinced himself that he preferred it this way. Relationships demanded time, energy, and most importantly, vulnerability, something he had learned to avoid from a very young age. His only true connection was with Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper who had cared for the mansion for over 2 decades and who, in a way, had become a maternal figure in his structured life. As he walked, Nathaniel glanced at his platinum watch, a gift he had given himself upon closing his first billion. 11:17. Soon, he would return to the mansion for his nightly routine: a glass of red wine, half an hour of reading, and then sleep. Everything timed, everything under control. That was how he liked it. Then an unexpected sound cut through the night's silence. Nathaniel stopped, tense. Years of tough negotiations had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about that moment felt different. The sound came again, this time clearer, more defined. A cry. In fact, 2 distinct cries, in unison, coming from the direction of the park. His first reaction was to ignore it. Other people's problems were not his responsibility, but there was something in those sounds, something visceral and desperate, that prevented him from simply turning away. Against all his rational nature, Nathaniel found himself walking toward the gates that separated his property from the park. The night guard, surprised to see his employer approaching, quickly opened the gate. "Mr. Blackwood, is everything all right?" Nathaniel made a brief gesture with his hand, dismissing the employee's concern. His steps led him to a darker area of the park, illuminated only by the diffuse light of distant street lamps. There, under a park bench, he found the source of the sounds that had disrupted his routine. 2 babies, who couldn't have been more than a few months old, were wrapped in a tattered blanket. They were shivering despite the fabric covering them. Nathaniel froze for a moment, his analytical mind trying to process the surreal scene before him. It was then that he noticed something glinting near the children, a golden pendant with a crest he had never seen before. "Sir?" The guard's voice brought him back to reality. "Should I call the authorities?" Nathaniel observed the babies more closely. Something about them stirred a feeling he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was their frightened eyes or the way their tiny hands clung to each other. It was then he noticed something even more intriguing. Both had an identical birthmark on their right wrists, a small crescent-shaped mark. "No," he finally replied, his voice firmer than he felt. "Help me take them inside." The guard hesitated for a moment, but years of service had taught him not to question his employer's decisions. Carefully, they gathered the babies and the blanket with the pendant. As they crossed the gardens back to the mansion, Nathaniel felt the weight of his impulsive decision grow with each step. What would he do with 2 children? His life was organized, methodical, predictable. Children were the opposite of all that. Yet something within him, perhaps that part of his humanity he had locked away for so long, told him he couldn't simply ignore the fate of those little beings. As they entered the mansion, they were greeted by Mrs. Eleanor, who was still awake, tidying up the final details of the day. Her eyes widened as she saw her employer carrying one of the babies, while the security guard brought the other. "Good heavens, Mr. Nathaniel, what happened?" "Eleanor," he began, his voice betraying a rare uncertainty, "I need your help. I found these children abandoned in the park and, well, I couldn't leave them there." The housekeeper, quickly recovering from her initial shock, was already in action mode. "I'll prepare some warm milk and gather clean." "Blankets. They look cold." She paused, observing her employer with a mix of surprise and something that seemed like pride. "You did the right thing by bringing them here." As Mrs. Eleanor moved through the house with the efficiency of years of experience, Nathaniel found himself sitting in his favorite armchair, still holding one of the babies. The little one had stopped crying and was now watching him with curious eyes. His brother, in the arms of the security guard, had also calmed down. At that moment, observing the two children and the mysterious pendant that accompanied them, Nathaniel Blackwood, the man who had built his life on calculations and predictability, felt he was about to embark on a journey that would change everything he knew. What he didn't yet realize was just how profound that change would be. The first night, with the babies, transformed the Blackwood mansion into a scene completely unlike its usual self. The meticulously cultivated silence gave way to a symphony of infant sounds, constant movement, and whispered conversations between Nathaniel, Mrs. Eleanor, and Dr. Richard, the family's private physician, who had been urgently summoned to examine the children. "They're two healthy boys, approximately 6 months old," the doctor explained, putting away his instruments after a thorough examination. "Identical twins, as you may have already noticed. They are a bit dehydrated, but nothing that some basic care won't fix." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Those birthmarks are quite peculiar. I've never seen anything like them." Nathaniel, who was standing near the window of the makeshift room, silently nodded. The crescent-shaped marks on the children's wrists intrigued him as much as the pendant now resting on his desk. There was something familiar about that crest, like a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. "I'll need to report this to the authorities," the doctor continued, "but I can wait until tomorrow if you'd prefer to organize the situation better." "Thank you, Richard," Nathaniel replied, his voice carefully neutral. "I'd like to investigate a few things first. I have a feeling there's more to this story than a simple abandonment." After the doctor left, Mrs. Eleanor arranged one of the guest rooms with 2 makeshift cribs for the babies, using pillows and soft sheets. Her experience as a mother and grandmother proved invaluable in that moment. "You need to rest," she insisted, noticing the dark circles beginning to form under her employer's eyes. "I'll stay with them tonight. We can sort out the rest tomorrow." But Nathaniel couldn't rest. In his office, he examined the pendant under the light of the desk lamp. The crest displayed a rampant lion, surrounded by what appeared to be Celtic symbols with inscriptions in a language he didn't immediately recognize. His analytical mind was already formulating plans. In the early hours of the morning, still without sleep, he began making calls. The first was to Eleanor Dawson, a renowned historian and genealogy expert who had previously provided services for his company in matters of historical documentation. "I need your complete discretion on this matter," he explained after recounting the events of the previous night. "I want to know everything about this crest and these inscriptions, and I need it to be quick." Then he contacted Michael Stone, his head of security, who was on leave. "I want security footage from the park and the surrounding streets, last 48 hours, and I need a private investigation team, the best you can find." As he organized the investigation, Nathaniel found himself watching the babies sleep. Their identical, serene faces contrasted with the mystery surrounding them. How could someone abandon 2 such small children, and why leave them with an object that seemed so valuable? Mrs. Eleanor entered the room quietly, carrying a cup of coffee. "They need names," she remarked softly. Nathaniel frowned. Names. Something so basic he hadn't even considered it yet. "Suggestions? You should be the one to choose," she replied with a gentle smile. "After all, you were the one who found them." At that moment, one of the babies opened their eyes, fixing their gaze on Nathaniel with an intensity surprising for someone so small. The other soon followed, as if connected to their sibling by an invisible thread. Michael and Raphael, Nathaniel said, surprised by how quickly the names came to mind. Names of angels, protectors. They seemed fitting for children who had entered his life so mysteriously. The day progressed with a series of urgent preparations. While Mrs. Eleanor coordinated the purchase of diapers, clothes, and other essentials, Nathaniel stayed in his office, alternating between phone calls and computer research. Eleanor Dawson arrived in the early afternoon, her eyes gleaming with excitement as she examined the pendant. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, adjusting her magnifying lenses. "The inscriptions are in medieval Latin, but there are elements that suggest a much older origin. And this coat of arms, I'm sure I've seen it somewhere before. How long until we have concrete answers? With a dedicated team, perhaps a week for the first significant discoveries. But I can tell you this," she held up the pendant, "this is no ordinary piece. The quality of the craftsmanship, the symbols. This belongs to an important lineage." Michael Stone also brought his initial findings. The security cameras had captured images of a black car briefly stopping near the location where the children were found, but the license plate was obscured, and the angle didn't allow for identification of the driver. "There's one more thing," Stone added hesitantly. "We found this attached to the children's blanket." He handed Nathaniel a small piece of paper, partially damaged by moisture. On it, only 2 words were written in elegant handwriting. "Protect them." A week had passed since Michael and Raphael arrived at the Montgomery mansion. Nathaniel's methodical routine had been completely reshaped to accommodate the needs of the babies. His office, once a sanctuary of order and silence, now housed a double crib where he could watch the little ones while he worked. That Saturday morning, as the twins slept under the attentive care of Mrs. Eleanor Dawson arrived with the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Her graying hair was slightly disheveled, and she carried a thick folder under her arm. "I've found something extraordinary," she announced, spreading documents across Nathaniel's desk. "The coat of arms belongs to an ancient European noble family, the Valois-Brunswick, a lineage dating back to the 15th century, with connections to several European royal houses." Nathaniel examined the old photographs and documents Eleanor presented. "And what happened to this family?" "That's the most interesting part," replied Eleanor, her eyes shining with the excitement of the discovery. "The family practically vanished. About 30 years ago. The last Duke, Philippe Valois-Brunswick, was known for his philanthropic work and for managing one of the largest private fortunes in Europe. He and his wife, Isabella, had only one daughter, Marie-Claire." Nathaniel noticed a hesitation in the historian's voice. "And Marie-Claire mysteriously disappeared at the age of 18 during a trip to America. A few months later, her parents were involved in a helicopter accident in the Rocky Mountains. The family fortune was placed under the administration of a board of trustees awaiting the appearance of a legitimate heir." Nathaniel's mind began to connect the dots. "You think the twins could be grandchildren of Philippe and Isabella?" "It's possible. The crescent-shaped birthmark was a known trait of the Valois-Brunswick family. It's documented in several historical records of the family." At that moment, a soft cry came from the crib. Nathaniel automatically stood up, a reflex he had developed over the past week, and picked up Raphael in his arms. The baby calmed down almost instantly at his touch, something that still surprised him. "There's one more thing," Eleanor continued, watching the interaction with a subtle smile. "I managed to identify the inscription on the pendant. It's an ancient family motto, Veritas in tenebris lucet. The truth shines in the darkness." Michael Stone chose that moment to enter the office, bringing new information about his investigation. "Mr. Blackwood, we've identified the car from the security cameras. It belongs to a car rental company. The customer paid in cash and used fake documents, but we managed to get a partial image of him." Nathaniel examined the grainy photograph that Michael had handed him. It showed a middle-aged man with graying hair and an elegant posture entering a vehicle. There was something familiar about his face, but the image quality didn't allow for precise identification. "There's more," Michael continued. "Over the past few weeks, there have been inquiries about the Valois-Brunswick family in various city registries and libraries. Someone is actively searching for information about the family." Nathaniel felt a shiver of concern run down his spine. If the twins were indeed heirs to the Valois-Brunswick family, that would explain the request for protection found with them. But who had left them there? And why had they chosen his property specifically? Mrs. Eleanor entered the office with Michael in her arms. The baby smiled, reaching his tiny hands toward his brother. It was remarkable how the two seemed to communicate. Without words, as if they shared a secret language only they understood. "We need to increase security," Nathaniel decided, "and keep all of this absolutely confidential for now. If these children are truly heirs to the Valois-Brunswick family, they could be in danger." Eleanor gathered her documents, promising to continue the research. "I'll focus now on Marie Claire. If we can uncover what happened to her after her disappearance in America, we might find more answers." When everyone left the office, Nathaniel was alone with the twins. Michael had fallen asleep in Mrs. Eleanor's arms, and she gently placed him in the crib, while Raphael remained awake, playing with Nathaniel's silk tie. As he watched the two children, he felt an emotion he couldn't quite name. In just 1 week, these little beings had achieved what no one had in decades. They had broken through the barriers he had built around his heart. The thought that someone might want to harm them awakened a protective instinct in him that he didn't know he possessed. Picking up the pendant on his desk, Nathaniel examined the Valois-Brunswick crest once more. "The truth shines in the darkness," he murmured to himself. Something told him he was only beginning to scratch the surface of a much larger mystery. The Chicago autumn painted the gardens of the Montenegro mansion with golden hues when Nathaniel realized it had already been a month since the twins had entered his life. The transformation in his routine and his very personality was evident to everyone around him, especially to Mrs. Eleanor, who watched with silent satisfaction the changes in her employer. That afternoon, while overseeing the babies during their nap, Nathaniel received an urgent call from Eleanor. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and concern. "I need to see you immediately. I've found something about Marie Claire that will change everything." An hour later, Eleanor hurried into the office carrying an old yellowed folder. "It was in the archives of a private hospital in Aspen," she explained, spreading documents across the table. Marie Claire was admitted there under the name Maria Clara Silva, 9 months after her disappearance. Nathaniel examined the documents with growing attention. "She had a baby." "Twins," corrected Eleanor, pointing to the medical record. "2 boys. But there's something even more intriguing." She paused dramatically. "The father listed on the documents is Alexander Montgomery." The name hit Nathaniel like a punch to the gut. Alexander Montgomery had been his mentor in the early years of his business career, a brilliant and charismatic man who had mysteriously vanished 5 years ago, leaving behind a crumbling business empire. Alexander never mentioned anything. "About this," Nathaniel murmured, more to himself than to Eleanor. "There's more," she continued. "I found records that Marie Claire and Alexander met during an environmental conservation project in the Amazon. She was a volunteer, using her alias, and he was expanding his business in the region. Apparently they fell in love, but kept the relationship secret." Nathaniel stood up, walking over to the crib where the twins were sleeping. He observed their delicate features, searching for traces of his former mentor. How had he not noticed it before? The shape of their eyes, the contour of their faces. There was something of Alexander in them. "Why did he never tell me?" he asked aloud. "Perhaps because the story doesn't end there," Eleanor replied, her voice lowering a tone. "I found evidence that Alexander was investigating something related to the Valois-Brunswick family before his disappearance. He had hired private investigators and made several trips to Europe." The cry of one of the babies interrupted the conversation. It was Michael, waking up hungry. Nathaniel picked him up with a naturalness that would have surprised even himself a month ago. Raphael, as always, woke up seconds later. Mrs. Eleanor entered with the bottles already prepared, but Nathaniel signaled for her to wait. There was something comforting about feeding the babies himself, a connection that grew stronger every day. "Alexander always said there were secrets that could change the world," he commented as he fed Michael. "At the time I thought they were just the musings of a man obsessed with mysteries. Now, Now it seems he was involved in something much bigger, Eleanor finished. The question is, what did he discover? And why were the babies left specifically on your property? Nathaniel reflected on the past few weeks, on how his life had completely changed since that night in the park. The words on the note, "Protect them," took on a new meaning now. Had Alexander, his mentor and friend, planned all of this? We need to find Alexander, Nathaniel decided. If he's alive, he must have answers. I've already started looking, Eleanor replied. There are records of bank transactions in his name in different countries over the past few years. The last one was 6 months ago, in a Swiss account. At that moment, Michael Stone entered the office with a concerned expression. Mr. Blackwood, we've detected suspicious activity around the property. Someone has been photographing the mansion in recent days. Nathaniel felt his protective instincts kick in. Increase security. I want more guards, infrared cameras, everything. And prepare the private jet. We may need to travel on short notice. As he finished feeding the twins, Nathaniel couldn't help but think about Alexander. His disappearance had always been a mystery that intrigued him, but now, with the babies in his life, everything took on a new dimension. What had his mentor discovered that was so important? And why had he chosen Nathaniel as the guardian of his children? Mrs. Eleanor, who had been silently observing everything, approached with a cup of tea. You seem different, she commented, softly. I've never seen you so alive. Nathaniel looked at the twins, now playing peacefully in their crib. It was true. For the first time in years, he felt that his life had a purpose beyond numbers and contracts. These little beings, who had arrived so mysteriously in his life, had awakened something he thought he had lost long ago, his humanity. The morning began with a disturbing discovery. Michael Stone burst into Nathaniel Blackwood's office even before sunrise, bringing security camera footage that showed an intruder attempting to scale the walls of the mansion during the early hours. The trespasser had fled upon being detected by the sensors, but left behind something unsettling, a white rose with a black ribbon tied to its stem. This has a specific meaning, explained Eleanor Dawson, who had been summoned to the mansion immediately. White roses with black ribbons were the personal symbol of Isabella Valois-Brunswick. She used them at all the family's important events. Nathaniel watched the twins playing on the rug in his office as he absorbed the information. Michael and Raphael, oblivious to the tension among the adults, giggled as they discovered new sounds and movements. In just a few weeks, they had started crawling, turning every moment into a new adventure. Someone is sending a message, Nathaniel concluded, his voice tense. They know who the children are. Eleanor nodded, flipping through an old file. I found something more about Alexander. In the months before his disappearance, he had made contact with a historian specializing in the Valois-Brunswick family, Professor Jean-Pierre Dubois from Harvard. And where is this professor now? That's the problem, Eleanor replied hesitantly. He had an accident in his apartment in Paris, 2 weeks after meeting with Alexander. He spent months in a coma, and when he woke up, he had lost much of his memory. Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. What had Alexander discovered that was so dangerous? His gaze instinctively turned back to the twins. Raphael had found one of his expensive Italian shoes and was chewing on it with satisfaction, while Michael watched his brother with clear intent to do the same. Mr. Blackwood, called Mrs. Eleanor from the office door. There's a lady at the reception insisting on seeing you. She says it's urgent. The visitor introduced herself as Clara Johnson, a former nurse from the hospital in Aspen. Her tired eyes revealed sleepless nights, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her bag. I took care of Marie-Claire during her hospitalization, she explained, after accepting a cup of tea. She made me promise that if anything happened, I would find the right person to protect her children. When I saw the news about her $1 million donation to the local orphanage, something told me the babies were with you. Nathaniel exchanged meaningful glances with Eleanor. The donation had been a cover to justify the sudden presence of the children in their home, but it seemed to have served a greater purpose. Marie-Claire often spoke about a treasure, Clara continued, something her family had protected for generations. She said powerful people were searching for it, people who wouldn't hesitate to harm others to get what they wanted. What kind of treasure? Asked Eleanor, leaning forward with interest. She never went into details, but one night, delirious with fever after giving birth, she murmured something about a secret library and a map hidden in a pendant. Clara paused, glancing nervously around. Alexander would secretly visit the babies at the hospital. The last time I saw him, he was agitated, saying he had discovered something too big. It was just a few days before. Her voice was cut off by a piercing noise, the mansion's security alarm. Michael Stone rushed into the office. Intruders! At least 3 armed men trying to break in through the back of the property. Nathaniel acted on instinct. Within seconds, he had the twins in his arms, following the emergency protocol he had established. Mrs. Eleanor was already waiting at the entrance to the underground bunker, a recent addition to the mansion that few knew about. Eleanor, come with us, ordered Nathaniel. Clara, you too. They might be after any information about the children. The bunker was a spacious and well-equipped area with supplies for several days, while the security team handled the situation. Above, Nathaniel tried to remain calm, soothing the twins who, sensitive to the tension in the air, had started to cry. The pendant, murmured Eleanor, picking up the object Nathaniel always kept close. If there really is a hidden map in it. Her skilled fingers examined every detail of the crest when she noticed something. Pressing a specific point, the top opened, revealing a tiny compartment. Inside it, a microscopic piece of paper folded several times. Carefully, Eleanor unfolded it. It wasn't a traditional map, but a series of numbers and symbols arranged in a circular pattern. In the center, once again, the inscription, Veritas, in tenebris luce. The hours in the bunker seemed to drag as they awaited news of the situation above. Nathaniel had turned one of the corners into an improvised area for the twins, who had finally fallen asleep after the initial commotion. Eleanor worked tirelessly on deciphering the code found in the pendant, while Clara shared more details about Marie-Claire's days in the hospital. The numbers look like coordinates, murmured Eleanor, her tired eyes fixed on the paper under the bunker's bright light. But they're encoded in a way I've never seen before. The circular pattern suggests a specific decoding key. It was then that Clara, who had been watching the historian's work, let out a soft exclamation. Wait, this pattern. Marie-Claire used to draw something similar when she was in the hospital. She said it was a family tradition, that every Valois Brunswick child learned it in the cradle. Nathaniel approached, intrigued. In his arms, Raphael stirred slightly, but remained asleep. What kind of tradition? It was a lullaby, Clara replied, furrowing her brow in concentration. Something about stars and maps. She sang it to the babies every night. Eleanor quickly grabbed her notebook. There are historical records of an ancient Valois Brunswick, tradition involving astronomy. The family had an obsession with star maps and constellations. The family crest itself has elements that reference celestial patterns. At that moment, Nathaniel's phone buzzed, a message from Michael Stone confirming that the property was secure. The intruders had fled, but left behind advanced surveillance equipment. Let's head up, Nathaniel decided. But I want everyone on high alert, and we need to speed up our travel plans. Back in the office, with security tightened, the group continued their investigative work. Eleanor had connected her notebook to a projector, displaying the enlarged code on the wall. If we consider that each number represents a specific stellar position, she murmured, typing furiously, and if the circular pattern is actually a representation of the night sky on a specific date. The date of Marie-Claire's disappearance, Nathaniel suggested, an idea beginning to form in his mind. Alexander always said the most important answers were hidden in seemingly insignificant dates. Eleanor quickly adjusted her calculators and celestial mapping programs. Gradually, an image began to form on the screen, a representation of the night sky over Paris on the night Marie-Claire disappeared. That's it, Eleanor exclaimed. The numbers are astronomical coordinates. Each sequence corresponds to a specific star, and together they form a pattern that points to... She paused, her eyes widening. An ancient Valois Brunswick estate in the French Rocky Mountains. Nathaniel observed the map forming on the screen. The place where Philippe and Isabella had the accident? Close to it, replied Eleanor. There are records of an older family, an estate in the region, a 16th century building that doesn't appear in more recent official documents. It's as if it had been deliberately erased from the records. Mrs. Eleanor entered the office carrying fresh coffee and some fruit. The twins, now awake, were playing in their special playpen, occasionally letting out laughter that seemed to lighten the tense atmosphere. There's one more thing, said Clara, who had remained silent for some time. The last time I saw Alexander, he mentioned something about a vault. He said the true inheritance of the Valois-Brunswick wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, something that could shift the balance of the world. Nathaniel picked up the pendant, examining it in a new light. The engraved words, Veritas in tenebris lucet, now seemed to carry a deeper meaning. We need to go to that estate, he decided, but first we have to ensure the twins' safety. Whoever is after them is getting bolder. Eleanor nodded, starting to organize her documents. I'll prepare a full dossier on the region and the estate. I also have contacts in Paris who can help us with local logistics. And I, said Clara, standing up, need to tell you something more about Marie-Claire. Something she made me swear to reveal only when the babies were safe. The atmosphere in the office grew even more tense. Nathaniel sat behind his desk, Michael now on his lap, playing with his tie, while Raphael watched intently from the playpen. On the night before she disappeared from the hospital, Clara began, her voice trembling slightly, Marie-Claire handed me a sealed letter. She said it was to be opened only by whoever was protecting her children. I kept that letter all these years, waiting to find the right person. With shaky hands, Clara pulled a yellowed envelope from her bag. The wax seal was still intact, displaying the same crest that adorned the pendant. The yellowed envelope trembled in Nathaniel's hands as he carefully broke the wax seal. The office was completely silent, except for the occasional sounds of the twins playing. Even Mrs. Eleanor, who rarely allowed herself moments of curiosity, remained in the room, standing near the children's playpen. Gently, Nathaniel removed the handwritten pages, recognizing an elegant and steady script. The letter was dated 6 years ago. To the guardian of my children, if you are reading this letter, it means you have found Michael and Raphael, and, more importantly, that you have chosen to protect them. I cannot express in words the gratitude I feel for this, but I need you to understand the true magnitude of what is in your hands. The treasure of the Valois-Brunswick family is not what everyone thinks. For generations, our family has guarded, not material wealth, but knowledge. Knowledge so powerful that many have tried to steal it, others have tried to destroy it. The secret library in our old estate in the Rocky Mountains contains documents dating back centuries of hidden history, truths that could rewrite much of what we know about the world. Alexander, the father of my children, discovered part of this truth. That is why we had to go into hiding. He found evidence of an ancient society that manipulated historical events from the shadows, using knowledge guarded by families like mine. But unlike other families that succumbed to greed and power, the Valois-Brunswick have always been guardians, protecting these secrets from misuse. There is a man, Victor Leblanc, who has dedicated his life to finding our library. He believes the knowledge guarded by our family can give him the power he has always desired. It was he who orchestrated the accident that took my parents, and I know he will not rest until he finds what he is looking for. The pendant I left with my children is more than a family heirloom. It is a key, but the true key lies in the blood of the twins. The mark they bear is not a simple birthmark. It is a sign, an ancient protection passed down through generations in our family. Only those who carry this mark can access certain secrets of the library. Alexander is trying to ensure that the knowledge guarded by my family is used for the good of humanity, not for power or control. He discovered something in recent weeks, something that made him fear even more for our safety. If you have found my children, it is likely because he led them to you. There is one more thing you need to know. In the library, there is a book called Codex Stellarum. It contains not only historical secrets, but also the truth about a scientific discovery my ancestors made centuries ago. A discovery that, in the wrong hands, could alter the course of modern history. If you are reading this, it means Alexander trusts you, And if he trusts you, so do I. Protect my children. Protect our secrets. But above all, protect the truth. The entrance to the library is not obvious. Look for the constellation of Cassiopeia on the walls of the old chapel. The rest, the pendant will reveal. But beware, Victor has eyes and ears everywhere. He is patient and cunning, and he will not hesitate to use any means to achieve his goals. One last thing. Tell my children that I love them more than anything in this world, that every decision I made was with their safety in mind, and that the true treasure of the Valois-Brunswick family lies not in books or ancient secrets, but in the hearts of those who choose to protect knowledge for the greater good. With eternal gratitude, Marie-Claire Valois-Brunswick. Nathaniel let the pages rest on his desk, his mind processing all the implications. Eleanor was the first to break the silence. That explains a lot. The family's obsession with astronomy, the coordinates on the pendant, and why Alexander chose you, Clara added. He always said you were different from other businessmen, that you had unshakable principles. Nathaniel stood up and walked over to the playpen where Michael and Raphael were playing, oblivious to the tension in the room. He observed the small marks on their wrists, now knowing they were much more than simple birthmarks. Victor Leblanc, he murmured. That name sounds familiar. Eleanor was already typing on her laptop. Victor Leblanc is the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in Europe, known for his research in alternative energy and, interestingly, for his extensive collection of rare books and historical artifacts. Today's intruders, said Michael, who had remained silent until now, were professionals, the kind of people only someone with considerable resources could hire. Nathaniel picked up the pendant, examining it with new eyes. It wasn't just an ancient piece of jewelry, it was a key to secrets that powerful people would kill to possess. We need to go to France, he decided, but we have to be extremely careful. If Victor Leblanc is really watching, every move we make will be monitored. Mrs. Eleanor approached, her expression resolute. I'll go with you. The children need constant care, and I don't trust strangers with that. Nathaniel nodded, grateful for his housekeeper's loyalty. He looked again at Marie-Claire's letter, at the pendant in his hand, and finally at the twins. In just a few weeks, these children had transformed his life in ways he never imagined possible. Now, he discovered that they were at the center of something much larger, something that could change the world. The Montenegro mansion had turned into a command center in the days that followed. Nathaniel, accustomed to managing large corporations, now applied all his expertise to planning an operation that needed to be both discreet and efficient. Every detail was meticulously thought out, every variable considered. We can't use my private jet, he explained during a meeting with his closest team. It would be too obvious. We need to travel separately through different routes. Eleanor, who had spent the last few days researching Victor Leblanc, shared her latest findings. He has connections in practically every major airport in Europe. We need to get creative with our route. And the children? Asked Mrs. Eleanor, who was cradling Raphael while Michael played with colorful blocks on the carpet. Babies draw attention no matter what we do. Nathaniel observed the twins for a moment. In just a few weeks they had grown so much. Michael was already trying to pull himself up using the furniture, while Raphael had discovered the joy of mimicking sounds. Each little milestone filled his heart with a pride he never thought he'd feel. I have an idea, said Clara, who had decided to stay with the group after delivering the letter. I can travel with Mrs. Eleanor and the children as a family on vacation. No one would suspect two ladies traveling with their grandchildren. Michael Stone entered the office with new information. Sir, that background check you requested on Victor Leblanc, we found something interesting. In recent months, he has made significant investments in alternative energy research companies, especially those focused on unconventional energy sources. The Codex Stellarum, murmured Eleanor. Marie-Claire mentioned a scientific discovery in her letter. Could it be related to energy? Nathaniel was about to respond when his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number containing only a photo. His face paled as he saw the image. It was himself holding the twins in the mansion's garden, clearly taken with a long-range lens. Seconds later, a text message arrived. Impressive how the mighty Nathaniel Blackwood has turned into a dedicated babysitter. We could strike a mutually beneficial deal, Marviel. He's watching us now, said Nathaniel, showing the message to the others, and he's finally decided to reveal himself. As if to confirm his words, the phone rang. The number was the same as the message. After a moment of hesitation, Nathaniel answered, putting it on speaker. Blackwood. The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, with a slight French accent. What a pleasure to finally speak with you. Victor Leblanc at your service. How did you get this number? A soft laugh. Please don't underestimate me. Just as I don't underestimate your intelligence. You must have already uncovered much about the Valois-Brunswick treasure. Imagine what we could achieve working together. Nathaniel watched the twins playing, oblivious to the tension in the room. I'm not interested in deals, Leblanc. Don't be hasty. The voice maintained its softness, but there was a steely undertone. What Marie-Claire and Alexander were hiding, it's not something that should remain concealed. The world needs that knowledge, and with your resources, my expertise, the world needs it. Or do you need it? Another laugh, this time less pleasant. You're exactly as Alexander described you, integrity to the core, but integrity won't protect those children forever. Consider my offer. You have 48 hours. The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in the office. Nathaniel moved closer. To the twins, his protective instinct stronger than ever. We need to move up the trip, he decided. Michael, prepare alternate routes. Eleanor, I want everything you can find on Leblanc's properties in the Rocky Mountains. Clara and Mrs. Eleanor, get the children ready. We leave in 24 hours. As the group dispersed to carry out their tasks, Nathaniel remained watching the twins. Michael had managed to pull himself up using the table and was smiling triumphantly, while Raphael watched him with clear intent to mimic the feat. I won't let anything happen to you, he murmured, more to himself than to the children. I promise. That night, as the final preparations were being made, a storm brewed over Chicago. Gabriel, in his office, studied ancient maps of the French, Rocky Mountains that Eleanor had managed to obtain. The pendant rested beside him, its crest glinting in the lightning's glow. Somewhere in those mountains lay the secret so many desired, a secret for which Alexander had vanished, and Marie-Claire had sacrificed everything to protect. The plan was complex in its simplicity. Mrs. Eleanor and Clara left first with the twins on a commercial flight to Lisbon. From there, they would take a train to Paris, posing as simple tourists enjoying Europe. Gabriel, Eleanor, and Michael took different routes, using alternate identities and various means of transportation. The first sign that it wouldn't be a smooth journey came at the Lisbon airport. Mrs. Eleanor, ever vigilant, noticed a man who seemed particularly interested in their group. He kept his distance, but his eyes were always fixed on the children. We need to split up, whispered Clara, who had also noticed the observer. There's a baby store on the second floor. We can take the escalator and blend in with other families. With years of experience caring for children, the two women executed the maneuver naturally. As they rode the escalator, a group of tourists with multiple strollers passed by, providing the perfect cover to lose their follower. In Paris, Gabriel was already waiting for them, discreetly staying in a small hotel in Greenwich Village, far from the usual tourist spots. He had arrived the night before after a route that included 3 countries and 4 different modes of transportation. Leblanc has people everywhere, Martin reported, having scouted the area beforehand. But we also have our allies. Eleanor made contact with a group of historians who have disagreements with Leblanc. The reunion with the twins was emotional. After 2 days apart, Nathaniel realized how attached he had already become to the children. Michael and Raphael, upon seeing him, stretched out their little arms toward him, letting out joyful sounds that made his heart tighten. They missed you, commented Mrs. Eleanor, smiling as she watched the interaction. They wouldn't stop, looking for you. Eleanor arrived at the hotel carrying an old folder. I found something in the archives of the National Library. There are records of a scientific expedition to the Rocky Mountains in 1786, funded by the Valois-Brunswick family. The interesting thing is that all documents related to that expedition mysteriously disappeared, except for a single page. The page in question showed a detailed drawing of a celestial phenomenon over the mountains, with notes in an old handwriting. At the center of the drawing, a particular rock formation stood out. "This looks like—" Nathaniel began, picking up the pendant. "Exactly," confirmed Eleanor. "The same formation is engraved on the pendant, and according to ancient maps, this formation is less than a kilometer from the old Valois-Brunswick estate." A sudden cry interrupted the conversation. It was Raphael who had dropped his favorite toy. Before any adult could react, Michael was already crawling toward his brother, picking up the toy and offering it back, showing a surprising level of empathy for such young babies. "The connection between them is extraordinary," Clara remarked. "Marie-Claire used to say it was a trait of the Valois-Brunswick family. Twins in the family always had a special bond." The moment was interrupted by Michael, who hurriedly entered the room. "We have company, 3 black cars just parked on the street, and there's suspicious activity in the lobby." Nathaniel acted quickly. "The backup plan. Now." Within minutes, the group split up again. Mrs. Eleanor and Clara left through the back door with the twins, heading to a small convent on the outskirts of Paris, where nuns who were friends of Eleanor awaited them. Nathaniel, Michael, and Eleanor set off toward the Rocky Mountains, but by different routes. The journey along the winding mountain roads was tense. At every turn, at every tunnel, they expected to encounter Leblanc's men. The French businessman had proven to be more than just an obsessed collector. He was a man with resources and the determination to get what he wanted. It was when they were less than an hour away from the old estate that Eleanor made a disturbing discovery on her tablet. "Nathaniel, you need to see this. I just received an email from one of my contacts in Paris. He found records of bank transactions. Alexander is alive, and he's in the Rocky Mountains." Nathaniel felt his heart race. His mentor, the man who had trusted him to protect his children, was alive and close by. But why hadn't he made contact? What else had he discovered that was keeping him hidden? The answer came in the form of a text message. "The library isn't what it seems. Beware of the Guardian. A." Putting his phone away, Nathaniel looked out the car window. The sun was beginning to set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the peaks in gold and purple. Somewhere ahead, among those ancient summits, lay the secret that Marie-Claire and Alexander had sacrificed so much to protect. And now, for the first time, Nathaniel began to feel the true weight of the responsibility he had taken on. The ancient Valois-Brunswick estate emerged from the mist like a ghost from the past, a 16th-century structure blending Gothic elements with the ruggedness characteristic of Rocky Mountain architecture. The chapel, mentioned in Marie-Claire's letter, was partially covered in ivy, its dusty windows reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. Gabriel, Eleanor, and Michael approached cautiously, alert for any sign of movement. The pendant, now hanging around Gabriel's neck, seemed to pulse with its own energy as they neared the site. "There," whispered Eleanor, pointing to the side wall of the chapel. The constellation of Cassiopeia. The stones on the wall formed a subtle pattern, almost imperceptible to untrained eyes. 5 lighter points on the dark stone, arranged in the characteristic shape of the constellation. Gabriel stepped closer, the pendant in his hands. "Wait!" A familiar voice cut through the night's silence. Gabriel turned, his heart nearly stopping. There, emerging from the shadows, was Alexander Montgomery. 6 years had left deep marks on his face, but his eyes held the same intensity Gabriel remembered. "You're alive," was all Gabriel managed to say. "And you've been looking after my children," replied Alexander, a weary smile on his face. "Thank you, Gabriel. I knew I could trust you." The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Victor Leblanc emerged from the other side of the chapel, accompanied by 2 armed men. "What a touching reunion," said Leblanc, his smooth voice contrasting with the implicit threat in his stance. "The mentor and the pupil together again, and I imagine Eleanor Dawson is the brilliant historian who deciphered the codes. Excellent work, I must admit." "It's over, Victor," said Alexander, stepping forward. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "On the contrary, my dear," replied Leblanc, "I understand perfectly. The discovery of the Valois-Brunswick, free limitless energy, capable of revolutionizing the world. Why keep it hidden? Because it's not just that, interjected Eleanor, understanding dawning in her eyes. The notes in the library, the 1786 expedition, it wasn't just about energy, was it? Alexander nodded gravely. The discovery comes with a terrible price. The Valois-Brunswick realized this centuries ago. Every attempt to use this knowledge resulted in catastrophic imbalances in nature. That's why they became guardians, not users. Nonsense, exclaimed Leblanc. With modern technology, we could control the side effects. Imagine the power, the wealth. And that's exactly why you will never have access to this knowledge, said a new voice. Everyone turned. Marie-Claire Valois-Brunswick stood at the entrance of the chapel, alive and determined. Marie! Alexander moved toward her but stopped when he saw Leblanc drawing a gun. You should have stayed hidden, my dear, said Leblanc. It would have saved so much trouble. Nathaniel, who had remained silent, finally understood. It was you who left the twins on my property, he said, looking at Marie-Claire. She nodded. Alexander told me about you, about your integrity, your strength. When we discovered that Leblanc was close, we needed someone who could protect the children while we prepared the final defense. Enough talk, Leblanc interrupted. Open the library, now. Nathaniel looked at the pendant in his hands, then at Alexander and Marie-Claire. In one fluid motion, he pressed the pendant against the central stone of the Cassiopeia pattern. A deep sound reverberated through the chapel. The stones began to move, revealing a passage. But something was wrong. Leblanc realized too late. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The Guardian, murmured Marie-Claire, the last defense of the Valois-Brunswick. The tremor intensified. From the depths of the earth, a metallic sound echoed. The revealed passage began to emit a pulsating bluish light. It's a self-destruction system, explained Alexander, stepping back. Activated only by Valois-Brunswick blood. Marie-Claire and I planned this. The library will seal itself forever. Leblanc moved forward, desperate, but it was too late. The stones began to shift again, sealing the passage. The last thing they saw was a flash of blue light, and then silence. The secrets of the Valois-Brunswick will remain buried forever, said Marie-Claire. As it should be. Nathaniel looked at Alexander and Marie-Claire. So many questions, in his mind. But before he could speak, his phone buzzed, a message from Mrs. Eleanor with a photo of the twins smiling. They are the true legacy of the Valois-Brunswick, said Marie-Claire, glancing at the photo over Nathaniel's shoulder. Not the secrets or the power, but the future. A future you helped protect, Nathaniel. 3 months later, the Blackwood mansion was a different place. Children's laughter echoed through the halls as Michael and Raphael, now taking their first steps, explored every corner under the watchful eyes of their parents, Alexander and Marie-Claire, who had finally been able to embrace their roles. Nathaniel, surprisingly, had become the twins' godfather. His transformation from a reclusive billionaire to a doting uncle was fondly remarked upon by everyone who knew him. The secret library of the Valois-Brunswick was lost forever, but a new kind of treasure had been found, the love of a family. In his office, Nathaniel still kept the pendant, now just a memento of his extraordinary adventure. The inscription Veritas in tenebris lucet had taken on a new meaning for him. The truth truly shines in the darkness, but sometimes that truth isn't in ancient secrets or hidden powers, but in a child's smile and the warmth of an embrace. The sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in gold. At the Blackwood mansion, a family gathered for dinner, no longer divided by secrets or danger, but united by love and the courage to do what was right. Nathaniel watched the scene with a smile, knowing that some fortunes cannot be measured in money, and that some treasures are made not of gold, but of moments like this.